Somalians ripped off that state for billions of dollars, billions, every year.
The city never saw it coming. Before dawn even touched the Mississippi, Minneapolis was already under federal crosshairs, its streets turning into a silent staging ground for the most aggressive multi-agency strike in the state's modern history. From the outside, it looked like any other winter morning frost on parked cars, steam rising from vents, the soft hum of a sleeping city. But inside the Federal Command Center, a digital map pulsed red like a warning flare. 27 targets, 900 identified individuals, more than 1,000 federal agents across FBI, ICE, HSI, DEA, DHS, Aviation, and U.S. Marshals ready to surge. And above all of it, one executive order signed only hours earlier authorizing Operation Northern Sweep to ignite. FBI counterterrorism units added another layer. Encrypted VoIP calls intercepted from a translation office in Cedar Riverside mentioned cold trucks, sealed books, and night cargo phrases echoing smuggling routes used in Mogadishu and Nairobi. Minneapolis police logged targeted assaults that made no sense as street crime, but perfectly fit a pattern of network discipline. Yet no agency had enough pieces to act alone. So in late 2022, a multi-agency task force formed fusing intelligence from FBI, DEA, ICE, HSI, U.S. Marshals, and local units. This was the moment the case shifted from suspicion to structure. Surveillance expanded to a citywide scale. Undercover agents embedded inside auto shops suspected of storing contraband in hollow engine blocks. Drone flights mapped nighttime foot traffic between high-rises. Linguists decoded 100 hours of encrypted calls. The deeper they went, the clearer the architecture became: a logistics wing hidden inside trucking subcontractors, a financial arm pushing millions through overseas channels, and a recruitment system drawing disposable enforcers from the edges of the community. Everything pointed to discipline, hierarchy, and foreign operational influence. But investigators still lacked a point of entry until a Lake Street money transfer employee noticed two men using different names but identical transaction patterns. He left an anonymous tip. That tip cracked the shell. Surveillance units tracked those men to an auto shop whose cargo manifests didn't match weight readings. Then came the October breakthrough: heroin bricks intercepted at the St. Paul rail yard, stamped with a black crescent Kareem's mark. 3 years of fragments fused into a complete map. Suddenly, Washington understood the scale. This wasn't a regional criminal group. It was an international artery embedded inside the Midwest. And the question emerged: if federal forces didn't strike now, how long until the network expanded beyond containment? By the final week of November, Operation Northern Sweep transformed from intelligence project to assault plan. Federal prosecutors drafted simultaneous warrants. Target lists reached 27 locations across Cedar Riverside sewer, downtown corridors, and suburban storage sites. Each location required its own breaching sequence extraction path, sniper overwatch chemical hazard team, and transport unit. DHS Aviation scheduled air assets for the pre-dawn window. The order was simple: every node in the Kareem grid must fall within the same minute. Teams rehearsed each breach using 3D scans of buildings. Breachers memorized entry sequences. Snipers trained on simulated balcony vantage points. Analysts predicted escape routes through alleys and subterranean garages. ICE HSI mapped 300 deportation targets with logistical ties to the network. Every detail was locked into a synchronized operational timeline. At 4:42 a.m. on December 2nd, the convoys rolled out. Snow drifted sideways through floodlights as MRAPs advanced along Cedar Avenue. Tactical medics checked gear. Breachers positioned heavy rams. Snipers scanned rooftops for silhouettes behind frost-covered windows. Above, the Mississippi DHS helicopters drifted in blackout mode, using thermal cameras to scan for armed sentries. Inside the HSI mobile command vehicle, the digital map pulsed as each team reported readiness. Green markers turned yellow. Yellow turned red. Go order locked. At 4:58 a.m., the command frequency went silent for half a second, then detonated with one word: execute. 12 charges exploded simultaneously, shockwaves echoing through concrete canyons. Flashbangs erupted in corridors. Windows sprayed glass into freezing air. Agents surged through stairwells in tight formations. Snipers neutralized lookouts behind curtains. U.S. Marshals boxed fleeing vans in seconds. DEA teams rappelled from rooftops onto fire escapes. Within 15 seconds, 12 locations were breached. Within 30, an entire district was under federal lockdown, and in that violent, calculated burst, the most synchronized federal raid in Minnesota's history became reality. Inside the raid's aftermath, Minneapolis no longer resembled a city, it looked like the remains of a fallen intelligence cell. Evidence filled an industrial hangar north of downtown tables, stacked with counterfeit passports, encrypted tablets still logged into private channels, fentanyl powder vacuum, sealed for long-distance transport rifles, hidden inside food delivery crates, and bundles of cash marked with Somali numerals. Transmission routers, VPN clusters, portable servers, burner phones tethered to battery packs. The infrastructure resembled a foreign operational hub, not a domestic criminal outfit. ATF specialists linked rifles to serial numbers traced through Europe and the Horn of Africa. DEA chemists matched fentanyl signatures to northeastern pipelines routed through Baltimore and New Jersey. ICE analysts mapped hawala transfers stretching from Minneapolis to Somalia, Kenya, the UAE, Sweden, and the UK. A single pattern surfaced every network node pointed directly back to Kareem. Federal indictments followed: narcotics trafficking, interstate distribution, money laundering, passport fraud, weapons procurement, obstruction, racketeering. Kareem's charges stacked into a lifetime in federal custody. His lieutenants faced 20 to 40 years. Mid-tier operatives faced 5 to 15. More than 300 individuals were processed for removal financial couriers, fraudulent document forgers, and logistic operators with immigration violations predating the criminal enterprise. In the command room agency, supervisors monitored drone feeds, thermal overlays, encrypted comms, and tactical grids. Every asset was already moving. Armored convoys rolled out from Fort Snelling tires, cracking over frozen asphalt in perfect formation. Helicopters drifted low above the river, flying blackout mode. No lights, no sound beyond the muted churn of blades slicing through cold air. Snipers from ICE HSI and FBI's hostage rescue team positioned themselves on rooftops, their scopes cutting through the frost. Breachers checked charges under dim red cabin lights. There were no speeches, no final motivation, only the hard silence of professionals who had waited nearly 3 years for this moment. But beyond the numbers lay the true revelation: the network functioned with military precision. Compartmentalized layers prevented infiltration. Parallel logistics ensured resilience. Redundant couriers enabled uninterrupted communication. Each node mirrored doctrines of East African operational cells, adaptable, mobile, and built to evade Western oversight. Investigators realized they hadn't dismantled a gang. They had collapsed a hybrid criminal intelligence structure masquerading as community commerce. The raid had seized drugs, weapons, cash, and documents. But the real victory was seizing the architecture itself, a blueprint showing how transnational networks embed inside diverse cities. And with Minneapolis now under federal control, agents knew that the evidence uncovered here would likely shape national policy far beyond Minnesota's borders. What emerged from interrogation rooms and seized documents was a power grid engineered with surgical precision. At the top sat Kareem, untouchable, insulated by cultural influence and a public image crafted over a decade. Below him operated 6 lieutenants, each commanding a specialized branch. The narcotics lieutenant oversaw fentanyl shipments routed through rail yards and trucking subcontractors. The weapons lieutenant sourced rifles from international brokers, moving them through shell companies disguised as import businesses. The financial lieutenant manipulated hawala networks with the skill of an intelligence officer, pushing millions across continents without triggering reporting thresholds. Further down the hierarchy were the logistical coordinators embedded in auto shops, small restaurants, community nonprofits, and freight depots. Their job was to blend the illegal with the ordinary, turning everyday spaces into covert operational nodes. Beneath them worked the enforcers, transient, undocumented, and loyal only to the system that paid them. They carried out intimidation operations, ran protection circuits, and enforced discipline with precision that confused local police for years. But the true danger was the network's adaptability. Analysts found evidence of planned expansion into Chicago, Columbus, St. Louis, and Philadelphia. Blueprints for safe houses, routes for narcotic transport, drafts of financial flows mirroring war zone smuggling models. Kareem had intended Minneapolis to be the command hub of a continental network. For federal agencies, the realization was chilling. If the December raid had been delayed by even months, Minnesota could have become the operational capital of a pipeline stretching from the East Coast to the Midwest. And the question that haunted Washington was unsettling: how many other cities housed networks that looked ordinary from the outside but functioned like transnational intelligence machines from within? As the dust settled, Minneapolis entered a phase no less complex than the raid itself, the purge. Prosecutors moved swiftly, fearing that hesitation would create openings for network remnants to reorganize. Within 72 hours, dozens of mid-tier operators were in custody. ICE executed removal orders at a pace rarely seen in a single metropolitan area, coordinating with East African governments to schedule flights before the end of the week. State officials worked beside federal agencies to stabilize public messaging, aware that a power vacuum inside Cedar Riverside could trigger community shock. Inside City Hall, a joint press conference brought together FBI, ICE, DEA, U.S. Marshals, and Minneapolis police. They didn't celebrate, they warned. Minneapolis had been closer than anyone realized to becoming a permanent trafficking hub, its rail corridors, immigrant business clusters, and warehouse districts offering ideal infrastructure for the kind of network Kareem had built. Whenever a large criminal architecture collapses, smaller predators attempt to rise from its shadow. The federal response was clear: not this time, not here. HSI embedded long-term intelligence units in the city. FBI kept task force personnel stationed locally. DEA monitored regional fentanyl signatures daily for signs of resurgence. The purge wasn't just about removing the old structure, it was about preventing the construction of a new one. For the community, the aftermath was surreal. Some felt relief, some felt fear, others felt a complicated mixture of betrayal and clarity. Families attended emergency meetings to protect vulnerable residents from the shockwaves of arrests and deportations. For the first time in years, some parents walked children to school on streets that felt lighter. The criminal shadow had lifted, but its absence revealed the depth of its reach. Across Cedar Riverside, the heart of Minneapolis' Somali district, the last lights flickered inside apartment blocks where lieutenants were believed to be sleeping. Agents waited in the shadows, hands steady on shields and rifles. They had studied every corridor, every exit, every structural weakness of each building on the hit list. This was not a raid, it was a synchronized detonation of federal power. A question hung in the air: how deeply had the hidden network infiltrated the community, the businesses, the transport corridors, and what would happen if even a single target slipped away into the winter dark? By the time the sun rose one full day after Northern Sweep, Minneapolis looked unchanged from a distance. Snow-covered rooftops, quiet streets, the same winter stillness. But the city's internal structure had transformed. Federal drones still hovered over alleyways. Tactical teams guarded breached buildings. Investigators combed through evidence that would reshape federal strategy nationwide. The raid wasn't the end of a battle. It marked the beginning of a nationwide recalibration. Washington issued a final internal report summarizing the operation. One line stood out: this wasn't luck, this was discipline. The message was clear. Organized criminal networks had grown sophisticated enough to replicate foreign operational models inside American cities. Yet Northern Sweep also proved that when the United States deploys full interagency force intelligence precision coordination, no network is impenetrable. The question now wasn't whether Minneapolis could recover, it was whether the country was prepared for the next iteration of transnational infiltration. For the people of Cedar Riverside, the future felt raw but hopeful. The invisible architecture that had shaped their daily lives was gone, but the vacuum it left forced Minneapolis to rethink how communities could be protected, empowered, and insulated from exploitation. And for viewers, analysts, and citizens watching the aftermath unfold, one question lingered: how many cities across America were unknowingly harboring their own versions of Kareem's empire? As Minneapolis rebuilt, the nation watched closely. Federal command stressed vigilance. Community leaders preached resilience. Families returned to routines shaped by new caution. And beneath it all, the quiet understanding settled: this operation had rewritten the rules of urban security and transnational crime intervention. Minneapolis survived the battle. Now it faced the long war of reconstruction and vigilance. At 4:58 a.m., the final authorization code came through Execute Northern Sweep. One heartbeat later, Minneapolis exploded. 12 doors blew in the same second charges, detonating with thunderous precision that rolled across the district like shockwaves inside concrete canyons. Flashbangs erupted, windows shattered outward in blinding bursts. Tactical teams surged through narrow hallways, boots hammering frozen stairwells. Snipers neutralized armed sentries hiding behind curtains. Within 15 seconds, a dozen locations were breached. Within 30, an entire district was under federal control. And in that instant, the largest criminal takedown in Minnesota's history had begun. Fast, violent, calculated, inevitable. He was the kind of man who could walk through a crowded Minneapolis market and leave no trace except a trail of obedience. Abdi Karim Sheikh Karim Haldan, celebrated publicly as a philanthropist, mediator, and community builder, was in truth the architect of one of the most disciplined criminal machines ever embedded inside an American immigrant district. Investigators had spent years peeling away the layers of his life, and each layer revealed a more calculated and dangerous figure. He funded youth programs, mosque renovations, business cooperatives, and cultural festivals. But beneath that carefully polished surface was a hierarchy that mirrored foreign intelligence doctrine, decentralized, compartmentalized, and fortified with loyalty, enforced by fear. Karim understood the psychology of displacement. He understood how to exploit gaps in immigration systems, how to manipulate trust inside close-knit communities, and how to build a criminal enterprise inside spaces law enforcement often feared to tread without political backlash. His lieutenants operated like a shadow government, each responsible for narcotics, weapons procurement, hawala, laundering forged documents, courier networks, and discipline enforcement. They rarely communicated directly. Orders traveled through coded channels or couriers who memorized instructions and destroyed devices minutes after receiving them, and because Karim never appeared in the data trail, he became a myth, someone investigators knew existed but could not touch. Yet beneath that myth, darker currents flowed. Violence around Cedar Riverside carried his signature. Store owners coerced into compliance. Community translators threatened after asking the wrong questions. Drivers beaten for refusing suspicious cargo runs. Crimes engineered to look like rival disputes, but always pointing back to the same invisible orbit. For years, federal agencies watched these fractures widening, knowing a single misstep could compromise undercover agents or trigger retaliation against civilians. But they also knew this wasn't a gang. It was an offshore trained operational cell planted precisely where the city was most vulnerable. From Washington, analysts noted the geopolitical echo networks like this had once destabilized entire regions in East Africa. Now one was rooting itself in America's Midwest under the leadership of a man who understood both cultures and the cracks between them. The question circulating through federal channels was simple. How long until his system expanded beyond Minneapolis? How long until the financial pipelines he controlled became conduits for something even larger? With his arrest still hours away, the one truth every agency understood was that Karim wasn't just hiding inside the community, he was shaping it in his image, quietly turning Minneapolis into the Midwest's silent trafficking hub. The investigation began as a whisper, anomalies in remittance flows, microtransactions that didn't fit seasonal patterns, and hawala transfers broken into dozens of precise denominations. HSI financial analysts first noticed the distortion transfers of $14,000, $26,000, and $42,500 routed through storefront kiosks disguised as family support. At the same time, DEA chemists matched fentanyl tablets in Wisconsin to a shipment seized in Newark, linking two states with no apparent connection until analysts traced the distribution routes back to Minnesota. The missing thread was suddenly clear: someone in Minneapolis was feeding a multi-state narcotics pipeline.